Hi, I'm Chris Martenson of Peak Prosperity, and it is Friday, January 23rd, and boy, what a week it was. This is your weekly wrap-up here. Where do I start? You know, we had the end of last week, we had the Swiss National Bank breaking the peg between the euro and the Swiss franc, and that created huge gyrations in the market, and it was really important for a number of reasons, which I really go into in depth in a two-parter that we've got on the website right now. The context for this story is that the central bankers are doing everything they can to keep the system going. They are sustaining the unsustainable. Golf claps for them. They're trying their hardest, well-meaning people, and they're still literally like the king ordering the tide back, because what they're trying to do is create infinite growth on a finite world. Good for them. I think they're trying their best, but they're going to fail. The Swiss National Bank was sort of a microcosm of that, because what they were trying to do was defend the little tiny Swiss currency against all the people who wanted to leave the euro currency and flood into their country, selling their euros, buying Swiss francs, driving the value of the franc up. The Swiss National Bank was holding that steady, and then finally it gave way because there's nothing they could do. It was a task that could not really ever have any chance of success. They did it for 3 years. That's a metaphor really for what I think the larger central bank play is, which is they're trying to deny that same sort of reality, which is there are these really big pressures coming. And so we saw this week, the European Central Bank came forward with their own version of a bazooka to mimic the Hank Paulson quote about what the Federal Reserve in the United States could do. Their bazooka is quantitative easing. They're finally doing it in Europe. It's 60 billion euros a month. The participants at Davos were saying, oh, this is bold and essential. And by bold, they mean it's bold because the European Central Bank is going to make the Davos participants, the 0.1%, even more wealthy than they already are. That's bold because people everywhere are fed up to here with the idea of central banks printing money so that the already stinking wealthy can get even wealthier. So that is bold. And it's essential because how else were they going to get even wealthier? Not by their own efforts, obviously, because funny money printed out of thin air enriches a few at the expense of many. And the thing that the Davos participants, the Wall Street Journal, MSNBC, everybody else who's going to talk to you about this would like for you to believe is this. These people are getting wealthy through some mysterious mechanism. The wealthy are getting wealthier. Let's discuss it. It's troubling. Look how much wealthier everybody seems to be than everybody else. The reason this is happening is very simple, something we talk about at Peak Prosperity endlessly. When you print money out of thin air, you by definition are not creating wealth. You are transferring wealth from one person to another. So when the Federal Reserve, the European Central Bank, when they print money with quantitative easing and the already wealthy get wealthier, what's really happening is the right question to ask is, who did that wealth get transferred from? Because we know who it ended up to, right? We know who the recipients were. The people it got transferred from is everybody else. You know this already. Your friends know this if they don't admit it to themselves yet. We can read this every day in the news. This is the process that's going on. My theme for this week is, this is deeply unfair. It is really not fair. It's really fundamentally unjust to ask everybody to give up a little bit so that a few can receive a lot. Because the few already have a lot. You know, how much is enough? How much is too much? We're not having that conversation yet. I will submit to you that the average Davos participant, if we want to pick on that meeting, it just happens to be going on right now, but there are plenty of people who don't go to that, who easily belong to the same economic club, the very, very tiny wealthy. In fact, it was Oxfam this week came out with a study that said that by 2016, 1% of the people in the world will own as much as the bottom 50%. Now, when I say own, we have to be careful. I'm talking about paper wealth. So if we're adding up dollars, euros, yen, if we're adding up stock portfolio holdings, bond holdings, paper wealth, it's true. 1% by 2016 will own as much as the bottom 50%. It's not real wealth. Real wealth is oil, water, productive farmland, good real estate, things like that. But here's the thing. the freshly printed money that's coming out of the Federal Reserve or the European Central Bank is being used by the already wealthy to buy those very things. So they are rapidly transferring their paper wealth into real tangible wealth. They are going to end up owning it all because we, the people, granted to the central bankers the power to print money out of thin air. It's an extraordinary power. Requires exquisite oversight to make sure it's not being abused, because you can't trust people with that much power without oversight. Without oversight and accountability, if things can go wrong, they will go wrong. That's history is just complete on that subject. The Federal Reserve, every single year it's been in operation, and to this day, has resisted being audited because it would compromise their political integrity and autonomy. Political autonomy? Are you crazy? Every time the market even has a tiny hiccup, they trot a Fed official out to talk it back up. Alan Greenspan visited the White House more times in a 3-month window during the run-up to the Iraq War II than all the other Federal Reserve chairmen combined in all of history. It is obviously true that our central banks are now political entities, political beasts. Therefore, they need to be audited. We deserve to know what's happening with that money. But even without the audit, I can tell you what's happening. They're printing money out of thin air, jacking up the prices of assets, and using that as a smokescreen to say, look, we're doing good work in the world. They're not. They're jacking up financial asset prices. So with that, I would invite you to come by the website. We've got really an extraordinary conversation. In fact, if you want to look at a really interesting one, I interviewed Gail Tverberg, and this was about oil and peak oil. But look at the comments that came on the thread underneath that particular discussion. It's under Featured Voices. It's a podcast that I did. The community at Peak Prosperity has just come up with an extraordinary and beautiful discussion underneath that covers all kinds of things that go well beyond the concept of peak oil, but it's really about how are we going to face this part of history. What are our frameworks that we use mentally? It's just really an extraordinary common thread. So that's an example of what you can find. Very intelligent, very safe, wonderful conversation. So with that, I hope you join us and take a look at that 2-parter we've got on why this next break, when it happens, it's really going to be a bad one, and it's probably going to hurt everybody. And doesn't have to be that way, but unfortunately it looks like that's the direction we're going. So with that, thank you very much for listening, and have a great weekend.